Hi there to anyone joining at the moment. We are seeing a lot of people coming in right now, so we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Skai and the IAB. My name's Michelle. I'm Senior Director of Marketing here at Skai. I've done a lot of these sessions in the US over the last couple of years with retailers and brands, but as you can tell by the accent, I am based in the UK. So super excited to be doing this in our home turf this week. Today's session is going to be made up of two parts. We've got the amazing Daniel Knapp from the IAB, who's going to be sharing some hot off the press data. So you guys are going to be getting a first look at all things 2022 retail media and the outlook for 2023. Daniel's going to be covering a lot. So we have got a panel discussion where we're going to be diving deeper into some of the key themes and topics that he talks about. Before that, some quick housekeeping. So everybody's in listen only mode. We can't see you, we can't hear you. If you've got any questions, please submit them via the Q&A just on the right hand side of your screen. We might not get around to answering them all today. We have got a lot to cover, but we will be following up with a blog. So if we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will make sure that it gets answered in the follow-up content. If you've got any sound issues, then you won't be able to hear me say this anyway, but you can access the audio via the telephone as well. The dial-ins would have come around about an hour ago. And Dasha, my colleague, is on the other end of webinar at skai.io if you experience any other issues. For those of you who aren't familiar with Skai, just very quickly, we're nothing to do with Sky TV, we're nothing to do with Sky Sports, we're nothing to do with Jeff Selling. We used to be Kenshu, founded in 2006, helping advertisers back then to automate and optimize their advertising on Google. Since then, we've expanded. We support all social media channels today. And in 2017, we were an Amazon Ads API partner, really helping retail media advertisers to, again, kind of unlock insights and streamline execution, measure holistically across Amazon and also all of the other retailers that you can see on the right-hand side. Very exciting this week, just to kind of flag, we actually launched Sainsbury's and Argos support through Citrus Ads. So if anybody's interested in that, please do get in touch. But for now, let's focus on today's session. So Seb, I'm going to hand over to you first of all. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and where retail media sits in HP?
Sure. So hi all, I'm Seb. So I'm the EMEA Director of Paid Search and E-commerce at HP. So as at HP to properly manage retail media, so we've been managing stakeholders and retail media activations through an agency model over the past 5 years. And then we've recently decided to bring everything in-house in terms of activation. And we've hired basically a brand new team to take on this activity in EMEA. And the purpose of this team is basically twofold. First, to deliver great campaign activation from a results perspective. And secondly, to work with internal stakeholders and give insights back to the business to help with decision making. And my team specifically looks after all on-platform activities. So Amazon, Cdiscount, Bowl, to name a few. And we work with our sister team who look after all the non-platform platform-related media to drive traffic to these platforms, whilst aligning again with our commercial teams on sales targets. So quite complex, as you can see.
Cool, thank you, Seb. And I know we're going to talk more about the difference between the on-site and the off-site later on. Mudit, over to you.
Hello, I'm Mudit Jaju, Global Head of Commerce at Wavemaker, part of Group M. I oversee essentially our commerce practice globally across all the markets. I work with a number of our largest clients, which includes everything from L'Oreal to Helly Hansen to Colgate to Danone. And in that capacity, I also oversee delivery of our e-commerce capabilities in all of the markets, as well as building out tools and IP, lots of partnerships, Skai being an important one. So I'm excited to be here and see what the questions are.
Cool, and we're excited to have you. So thank you both so much for joining. Daniel, I'm going to stop sharing, make you presenter, and hand over to you to actually, oh, sorry, make Daniel presenter. There we go.
Wonderful.
There you go. Sorry, I'm going to hand over to you to go into your presentation and introduce yourself as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michelle, for the intro. I'm excited to be here. My name is Daniel Knapp. I'm the chief economist at IB Europe. I've been an industry analyst observing digital advertising for the last 15 years. And it was about 2 years ago that we realized that the ad spend study, which we're conducting annually, doesn't really capture some of the most exciting new things in digital advertising, and that is retail media. Some things we're going to bundle into our search and our display number, but we realized we really need to take a completely new and holistic look at this rapidly emerging phenomenon to understand what's going on, what are player strategies, how quickly is this growing, and also how do the cyclical forces we're seeing in the economy and the structural changes we see in digital advertising with the demands of third-party cookies and so forth add further fire to this opportunity. We've since conducted vast range of interviews with market participants, have done econometric modeling, and used other techniques to kind of figure out what the size of this opportunity is in Europe, and also how it's slotting into what's currently going on in digital advertising. So today I would like to share with you as a conversation starter a few European trends in a 2023 outlook on retail media. And being an economist and a gloomy German, I think we need to contextualize this with the broader economic environment. What you can see here on my screen is a combination of factors that shape the progression of our economy today. It's a polycrisis, as the economic historian AAnd says, and this particular combination of arrows and factors has a German term, Krisenbilder, or crisis pictures. And this particular crisis picture really reflects the kind of multivariate world that we're in. We got oil prices, we got pressure on Russia, we got the domestic situation in China, we got rising food prices, we got a gas boycott and so forth. So this is a hugely complex economic crisis that we're just moving into that really issues more simple or monocausal explanations. And that also makes economic forecasting, in particular, what is the impact on advertising, much harder, because different sectors in advertising will be affected differently. You can see a couple of red bits here in this crisis picture, and these are macroscopic events, i.e., if a certain combination of factors leads to one of these, all bets are off, forecast models will collapse, and things are going to be much worse. I remain optimistic that those won't happen, but there's of course a lot of uncertainty currently in the markets. This has also meant that we are seeing a correction of this exuberance that we've seen in 2020 and 2021, not really from a macroeconomic point of view, but also from a digital growth perspective. What you can see here is the Office of National Statistics in the UK, the official figures until the end of September this year about the total retail sales that are conducted online over the internet. And I think this chart is really symptomatic for our ad industry exuberance during the pandemic. We saw massive growth in the UK with over 40% year-on-year growth in digital ad spend in 2021, and on average 30.5% across 28 countries in Europe that we as IB Europe are tracking. And a key driver of this, of course, was the growth of SMEs, the explosion of streaming, but predominantly the rise in e-commerce, shifting models of how consumers buy stuff. And we saw this exponential surge in e-commerce growth during the lockdowns. And the phrase, we made a 4-year leap in 3 months. We often saw that printed in investment reports, company quarterly statements, in the pub, in the general interest press and so forth, so that we really took this leap ahead. But there's this phenomenon called reversion to the mean. And this is exactly what we're seeing here, that after an exponential surge, we're seeing a correction back to pre-pandemic spending levels, which is putting a damper on, of course, e-commerce growth as we expected it to pan out. And indeed, it's kind of continuing more in line with pre-pandemic levels. But there's a difference, of course. We now have an infrastructure of transacting on e-commerce, an infrastructure of using advertising within the e-commerce domain that we didn't have prior to the pandemic, which means our ability to drive e-commerce sales and to monetize e-commerce better through advertising has significantly increased regardless of this overall correction of e-commerce growth. When we go deeper into e-commerce growth, I think it's pretty interesting to see, not in terms of advertising, but in terms of overall e-commerce sales, we're going to see a kind of lost opportunity of around 108 billion euros versus a January 2022 forecast. So what we have here is the total growth of e-commerce sales across all European countries with a 2021 January forecast from Statista, and then a corrected October 22 forecast from IAB Europe, taking into account latest data from industry associations, public statistic offices, and so forth. And we can see a huge correction here where this 108 billion euro gap is emerging. It will take quite some time until this gap has been filled, which in a sense makes advertising even more important to see how can we minimize this gap and how can we really maximize the e-commerce opportunity. The good news in all of this correction is that the pandemic has brought forward general e-commerce consumer adoption. What you can see here are statistics from Eurostat, the European Commission's official statistic bodies, and this still includes UK data, where of course we can see how many e-shoppers are there in Europe, and this means how many people have bought something on the internet within the last 12 months. Clearly, we saw a massive surge here during 2020 and a slight downward correction in 2021 as we were at the tail end of the lockdowns. However, the good news is that the 2022 forecast data, this is extrapolated full year data based on half year actuals from Eurostat themselves, we can see a slight increase, meaning that the pandemic has actually changed people's perception of where and how they can buy stuff. We are now in a very different world from 2019, and the basic readiness of people to use e-commerce has gone up versus 2019 by 6 percentage points. This is a huge leap compared to previous years, and this should make us confident that despite the overall kind of downward correction in volume of sales we're going to see over the next 2 years, we are now in a world where e-commerce overall is part of consumers' repertoire. Now, on top of the kind of, in a sense, digital hangover that we saw after this exponential growth, which is now being corrected, both in terms of e-commerce and overall ad growth, we of course faced with structural changes in our industry. Apple ATT, third-party cookies, the walled gardenization of nearly everything that's emerging out of this. And we can see that we are increasingly moving away from an interoperable internet to something that's often called a splinternet, a fragmentation into separate ecosystems with their own reporting metrics, their own attribution, and overall lack of compatibility versus others. And we have of course, the usual suspects in here of Google and Apple and Facebook and Amazon Internet, but increasingly we can also see a fragmentation within what some call the open web. Being split into a topics web, an ID web, an anonymous or contextual web, which is also not interoperable. I think remarkably what we're seeing is a lot of new walled gardens emerging, and these are sometimes not single company gardens, but actually based on alliances, like for instance, several CTV alliances in Europe, or actually in a sense, puzzle piece gardens. If you think, for instance, about how Shopify's payment solutions are being rolled out also across properties that Shopify doesn't own, including Snap, including the Meta properties, TikTok, and so forth. Remarkably, there's a whole new kind of walled or hedged garden type emerging around retail media, meaning that we can see now those platforms or those offerings thriving where ad exposure, conversion, and sales are conflated into one single platform without having to go to any without having to go to any third-party environment. And it is this splinter net that is helping to propel retail media forward. We'll speak about interoperability across retail media properties further in the panel, but it's this overall structural change in the internet that is helping retail media grow and become important as a new channel. Given both cyclical changes in the economy and structural changes in advertising, we have, as IAB Europe, revised downwards our outlook in overall digital ad spend in 2022 and also 2023, with an expected rebound in 2024. Our expectation for a rebound relies on the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, figures for overall economic growth. And they're currently expecting a rebound in the overall economy in Europe by 2024. Should that change, we'll also revise our forecasts here. It's notable that I was still fairly optimistic in May 2022 when we had our annual IAB Europe Interact event in Madrid, forecasting a 10.1 percentage point growth versus 2021. I've now downwardly corrected this to 7.1%, and I also revised the 2023 forecast to a mere 2.4% overall digital ad growth. This reduction primarily comes as we can see a huge saturation in terms of social media, not growing in terms of users, rapid price inflation, and of course the impact of Apple ATT and other structural factors. So it's mainly social media that is dragging down this growth just because it's so large, but of course also other parts of the digital ad economy are impacted. I think crucially, what we're seeing is that so far, it is mostly structural and not economic issues which are causing this reduction in the forecast, and it will only be in 2023 when structural and economic issues come together. That, of course, means in such an environment, channels will thrive that can provide certainty in terms of conversion measurement, that are highly tactical, that can deliver value at the bottom of the funnel, and also those which are immune or nearly immune to the structural changes we see in advertising, i.e. those rich with first-party data. And with this, of course, retail media is predestined to grow despite the headwinds that we see. The shifting definitions, of course, of retail media, we include on-site and off-site as well. We include endemic and non-endemic, i.e. retailers selling ad space for brands on their platform for sale, but also for others. And we can see these multiples here, with total digital growth will be nearly flat in 2023. Retail media will grow 7.x that, with a still healthy double-digit growth of nearly 19%. We can see these multiples for retail media continue over the successive years, even when the macroeconomic headwinds wane, just because of the structural advantage it has with the rich first-party data and a high measurability of impact. And of course, we can see the opportunity is huge, and these are not our figures, but these are stated figures by some of the leading companies exploring the space. Walmart already makes $2.1 billion from that, increasing to $4 billion. We see other players, not just in the grocery segment or in the retailer segment, but platforms like Instacart, Uber, moving into the space. Europe is behind, but we can see some of the large players in Europe are going to turn into nearly billion-dollar businesses. It'll be very interesting to see what mergers and acquisitions in the space are happening. You've seen the large kind of takeover with Albertsons in the US, which is going to create a massive Walmart contender as well. So more pressure coming into this market. Overall, we see the European market, including Amazon, that is, being already worth 7.9 billion euros in 2021 and going to grow to 25 billion by 2026, despite the macro situation. Amazon has the lion's share of all retail media to date, But we see that European endemic players are growing faster than that as they're rapidly deploying their offerings. There's new inventory coming available as new grocers, DIY platforms, etc. actually start their retail media offerings. And we're going to see the Amazon share decline over time to probably around 68, 69% by the end of our forecasting period. Crucially, although we just started talking about retail media systematically in our industry on this webinar in the IB context, it is not an emerging channel anymore. Let's briefly contextualize the numbers I've shown. I think when we look at newspaper print ads, retail media excluding digital, retail media is already as big as that. These are the Group M this year, next year numbers. If we say, right, 2026, let's include excluding AAnd, BVOD advertising, linear television, retail media is likely going to be larger than this market. So we must take it seriously. It's not a nice to have for brands anymore, but it requires serious strategic engagement at the C-level to really seize this opportunity. For me, the real comparison though is search, not other media, because both are crisis kits. They both show their value in highly dynamic and uncertain times. What I've mapped here is the growth in terms of total euro spent on each of those two channels on a year zero. For search, I took the macro recession, Lehman crisis, 08, as the year zero, and for retail media, 2020, the pandemic, when everything moved towards e-commerce. And you can see that the trajectory is fairly similar, but of course, retail media is going to take off further, not only because, of course, now we're in a much more mature digital ad market, but also because of the structural advantage with the rich first-party data that it has. But both are showing their first value in times of crisis and uncertainty. For advertisers, though, it's not just about the inventory, not just about media buying. So we started a survey in IB Europe to understand what advertisers want in retail media and how they currently use it. Of course, buying stuff on and off site is top of mind, but many are also thinking about retail media more strategically. How can we use fake door testing or other concepts to really develop product development through feedback loops in advertising? And how can we leverage more from retailers and use them as a source of first-party data, not just from an ad perspective, but also in terms of e-com transaction data? And this means that top of the wish list for many marketers is establish a closer link via retail media as the glue between the world of the CMO and the world of the CFO, with demonstrable ROAS, but also fundamentally access to in-store and e-com data. And retailers need to make more to make this happen. I think crucially, what we can see is retail media is helping in the overall e-commerce funnel. So here's an A.T. Kearney waterfall of typical e-commerce funnel with the fairly slim EBITDA margin here. In the topic SG&A, Service General and Administration, you have advertising. And of course, when we face signal loss in advertising, fragmentation of data across different platforms, SG&A can go high, affecting the overall efficiency of the e-commerce model overall. I think retail media plays a key role in here, if done right, to actually help create healthier e-com brands, as margins can go up when you have higher data granularity and when you can measure ad exposure and conversion into a single platform without signal loss. This means to me that we need to think about retail media differently though as well. I think the retail is as important as the media bit in it. So the markets of logistic and fulfillment and marketing are increasingly converging. We, in the world of advertising, have primarily thought about what's here on the left, in the left bubble. What does it cost to deliver a message that elicits the desired consumer response? The e-com world was thinking about what does it cost actually to get this product to the consumer so I can get my margin. What smart retailers are doing is they're using now advertising to ensure that the costs of delivery are kept as low as possible, i.e. advertising to promote goods to a customer that sits very close to a warehouse or somewhere where delivery costs are particularly low or delivery margins particularly high. I think this is one of the most exciting things to me, as retail media provides this glue for real outcome-based marketing, not just in terms of marketing metrics, but in terms of business metrics. We in Europe boast, as you can see here, strong retailers and marketplaces in terms of gross merchandise value. Each of those is moving rapidly into retail media, but I think alliances and partnerships within these can really increase the market potential even further and allow us to close the gap with the US. Lastly, I think what's important, this is from Amazon, it's not just bottom of the funnel, but we can increasingly see that retail media can power other media across the entire marketing funnel. Not everybody can do an Amazon buy sports rights or buy TV channels, in particular to target non-endemic brands, but I think there's several ways this can happen in Europe. Content and commerce partnerships can happen, agency-led collaborations. These are all fictional examples here to kind of help retail media data move further up the funnel. But also we could think about retailer-driven alliances, similar to publisher alliances or data alliances like Ozone in the UK or NetID in Germany. I think ultimately this bundling and collaboration is going to be essential to avoid a massive fragmentation that we're seeing in the market. With that, thank you very much, and back to Michelle, and I look forward to further discussion in the panel.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And that I'm sure everybody on the line found that interesting. We've had a ton of questions already asking you to send those slides over, so we will make sure that they come through to you after today's session. I know you mentioned during your presentation there, Daniel, the presentation that you did back at Interact in May, and I remember looking at that presentation and seeing themes like there's going to be more retailers exploding in Europe, like this is going to be a trend, and there's going to be growth of off-site media versus just the on-site. It's remarkable how in 5 months' time that's all already coming to fruition. Like, this isn't just theory anymore, it's happening. We've seen kind of with Amazon and the Monday night or Thursday night, whichever night football it is that they've announced partnerships with now. So I think lots of fascinating stuff there and lots of content that we can all get deep into today. So I know you spent a lot of time talking about these macroeconomic headwinds. Seb, from your perspective as a brand, what impact is this having on how you're thinking about 2023 and planning retail media spend?
That's a great question. So I think there's a few ways you can look at this. Now, let's look at, kind of what impact this means on kind of overall kind of media budget. So for us, HP, the business kind of understands that retail media is needed to kind of ensure that, we're speaking to consumers at the right time, at the right place, back to kind of what Daniel was saying earlier on. However, in my opinion, kind of future looking at this, I'm expecting to see the budgets become more conservative over the next kind of like 6 to 12 months than what we saw kind of over, the pandemic, where everything just went digital because there was no other way to get anything through the door. Now, again, this is mainly because of the macroeconomic challenges that, Daniel kind of explained to us just now. So that's kind of my personal kind of opinion on what we're going to see over the next couple of quarters, I'd say.
Well, and Mudit, I know we spoke when we were doing the prep call last week about kind of there is going to be this surging demand still. It's not going away. Daniel kind of showed it in his presentation today. This is obviously more demand, more budgets, causes inflation of ads. I know you've got some opinions on this and kind of what's going to happen over the next 12 months. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a comical amount of retail media inflation, quite frankly. I think the reality is that there's so I think there's two things happening. There's more demand because more brands are entering the space and have sort of seen it perform for them. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge the role of automation. It's much easier to spend money in retail media through using automation, somebody like Skai, than it used to be before. And I think brands have much more control, much more insight, and so they know a little bit more about what they're getting out of it. So I think that, excuse me, those are the two things that are driving a lot of this inflation. We are seeing a lot of inflation, and I think what brands are starting to do is a few things. So first of all, I think that they are starting to look in a much more holistic fashion, and it's not just very narrow term sort of focus on the ROAS of your search activation on Amazon is overly narrow. a way to look at it. So people are starting to look a little bit more broadly. And I think the other thing also is that, and this is a tough one, but you're not going to win all the battles, and it is too expensive and the wrong thing to do to try to be everywhere at the same time. And so I think it's really important that brands have the really clear view of what are the things where they absolutely need to be and where they absolutely need to move the needle, because sometimes there are investments we make because there's excuse me, there's an emotional aspect to it where, you know, you're on Amazon and you search for you do a generic search and you want to make sure that your brand pops up all the time. Well, that is very expensive to do. So I think it's important that brands be very clear about what they're trying to achieve with retail media, because it's simply impossible to afford everything that you bought. Everything you bought in 2022, you cannot buy in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as we start to think about more inventory becoming available, I'm sure we know that brands aren't going to be able to do it all. What are you seeing here? Again, kind of maybe back to you, Seb, with the likes of kind of DSP and CTV partnerships and coming into retail media. What trends are you seeing here? What impact is that having on your organization at HP?
No, great question. So I think we've just recently moved on to kind of the Amazon Marketing Cloud, so AMC, and it's actually been really interesting for us, because one of the big kind of barriers that we've had was, okay, combining search data, display data on platform, and actually understanding attribution models, or just being able to pull the data together and actually just report in one cohesive manner. So what we've done, we've actually gone the AMC route, created a cleaner, I'm going to say, data lake that we can actually format, just so that we can actually just do reporting across both channels now. So when we talk about crawl, walk, run kind of stats, this is definitely the crawl kind of period that we're looking at. And then we're going to be moving on to the plan is clean up the data, and then understanding user journeys, understanding, okay, what can we take from Vendor Central into the Amazon platform, because at the moment you don't have the connects, for instance. So there's quite a lot of things within the Amazon platform itself that you have on the one hand but you don't have on the other, and you need to manually bring everything together. So yeah, so that's one of the big things that we're looking at to bridge.
Can I just add to that? I think this whole notion of bringing things together is so critical. It's about being able to take insights from Amazon and applying them to other retailers, or thinking about how you use some of your first-party data more effectively, or thinking about how you use it for better dynamic creative optimization, for example. Thinking about the data sets that exist within Amazon outside of marketing and media data. So I think that if you really want to beat, excuse me, the ridiculous inflationary situation we're often in, and it's volatile more than inflationary actually, it is about bringing together all the different things that may require working with teams within your organization that you don't normally work with. So I think that there is a lot of solution. It requires an integration and a stitching them together to win in this world, I think.
If I can chime in, I think what is crucial here is that it's not just about media buying, it's about getting the insights, getting transaction data. And I think there's a potential flywheel effect that the more retail media kind of moves up the funnel, the more important will retail media exhaust data become for campaign planning, in the sense of which consumers are you reaching, who's buying your stuff that maybe you haven't thought about in your planning process, etc. So in a sense, paradoxically, the very kind of bottom of the funnel transaction data helps power the top of the funnel awareness role of retail media. But that requires, I think, closer relationships also between retailers and agencies, as many retailers, particularly in Europe, lack the team and lack the expertise to really do that together. So we need closer collaboration here.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just kind of retailers and agencies, but the brands and technologies like Skai. I think it's a challenge for all four of us to come together and to work on this. Mudit, you mentioned that these teams don't normally work together. That we know the kind of the display teams sit within brand awareness, and the performance teams are kind of managing the on-site. I guess, Seb, how are you thinking about that in terms of your structure at HP? Are you restructuring at all to allow for those changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, so at the moment, my team look at anything to do on site, on platform, across all the different kind of platforms that we use. Then we have our kind of sister team that look after all the offsites, bringing in, back to on platforms. So that's kind of one aspect, the activation side of it. Then there's the other aspect, which we kind of touched on in the last question, which is around, okay, so we've got teams in platform on advertising on the one hand, and then on Amazon you have the other side of the coin, which is vendor central. So obviously sales teams usually tend to use this to look at, to track sell out. Okay, what are your best AAnd or products and stuff like that, which actually, if you think about it, that's exactly the data that the activation teams need to get access to, because that's how you can help optimize, fuel the automation that Mudit was mentioning through Skai or other platforms that we could use to actually not only try and beat this inflation that we're seeing on platforms, but also be a lot more strategic with where we're going to be putting our budget. Is it going to be on generics? Is it going to be on brand, or are we going to go after competitive terms? So all this together, so yeah, so you're working internally with two different teams, then you're working with your entire organization on two fronts, because the tool on the platform is actually set up not to be cohesive, but actually for two different functions, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so beyond Amazon, we've talked a lot about that already. I know we've saw this week like our own partnership with Nectar 360 and Sainsbury's and Argos. How are brands determining which network to choose, which network to work with? Mudit, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that commercial considerations are generally top of mind, and I think that those are really important. But I think they are definitely prioritizing some the retailers that are more open to sharing data and are that offer a more scalable solution, essentially. Because I think that nobody is interested in ROAS of 8x if there's just like not the volume there, or the inventory is very difficult to actually access. So I think anything that scales up is a benefit. And I think that anybody that is more willing to share data and insights back, it means that there's a more sustainable presence for the brand to build on that retailer. I think that retailers are underestimating how difficult they've made it to buy media from them. There's one major European retailer, I won't name them, but a very big European retailer, where I actually did this yesterday. If you want to buy media from them, depending on what you want to buy, you have to contact one of 6 different sales houses. 6. On the one hand, we've Google Performance Max. On the other hand, we've got, well, if you want to buy the DSP, it's this one. And if you want to buy on-site search, it's that. And if you want to buy collaborative ads, it's that. And that is just not a level of complexity that brands are set up to deal with. So I think that making it really straightforward is important, but also being very comfortable with the kinds of data you're sharing. I don't think manufacturers are always going to want more data, and retailers will always want to give less data. And that's just a fact of life. But I think there is a happy medium, and retailers that are more open-minded about it, or are willing to share certain data sets via clean rooms, for example, find themselves sort of bubbling up to the top. And I think the other thing also is just the scale thing. I mean, I cannot overemphasize that. We have clients who say, sure, this was great, 8x ROI. What am I going to do with £50,000 in revenue? How does this become like how do I add 4% to my bottom line? That's the question being asked.
Yeah. Daniel, I know you spend a lot of time with the retailers. I follow you on LinkedIn and see you posting the pictures. How are they thinking about it from their perspective to address some of these kind of challenges? How do they want to show their value? What challenges do they have from their side?
I think Mudit's answer was really kind of comprehensive from the buy side. From the retailer side, indeed, as you said, sharing more data is crucial. But also, I think we need to understand that the retailers are not media or advertising businesses historically. Specialize in selling bananas or cornflakes and not media. And suddenly selling media is a huge cultural change, where we shouldn't underestimate how hard it has been and still is for retail media teams, not only to show their value in the overall organization, but also to kind of work constructively, for instance, with ecom teams to actually allow advertising on the site to launch new ad products. And there is a lot of cultural friction here, which, if not managed correctly, is going to well, reduce retailers' opportunity in this space.
Yeah, and of course you've got the conflict with the consumer as well. They've got their own demands from both of those angles. Seb, from your perspective, and the number of retail media networks that are now available to you as a brand, how do you even begin to get your head around this? Like, where do you start?
No, that's a great question. I mean, you know, Midit and Daniel kind of answered it, but I guess from a brand perspective now, I've moved over to the brand. So for example, us HP, we're live across five other marketplaces on top of Amazon in Europe, and that's just Europe. I'm not even talking about APAC or US or LATAM, because completely different marketplaces there. So for now, you know, for us, Amazon is still, you know, the main player in most of the markets that we operate in, from both a size and also a technical perspective. So for us as an in-house team, you know, fragmentation means we need more resource internally to manage these different marketplaces, which again, it's difficult. It becomes just not scalable ultimately at the end of the day. So some of the other marketplaces that we're working with are working really well. So Bol, you know, Bol, Allegro are a couple just to mention. So actually, you know, we've actually moved over to Skai to help us actually manage this chaos, so to speak, across all these platforms, which not only frees up a lot of my team's time through automated actions, automated bidding, which saves a hell of a lot of time, because obviously most of these platforms that we're utilizing aren't as advanced as maybe, you know, Amazon or Google, for example, which is really interesting. So you need basically a tool that sits on top of everything that kind of coordinates all of this.
Cool. And I promise I didn't pay him to say that. So thank you for the plug. On, I guess, the topic and a theme that's kind of come up a couple of times in everything you guys have been saying is measurement. And I know we did our own retail media survey earlier this year, and the #1 challenge that came up in that was how to measure success in a way that's meaningful to your organization. And I think that latter part of meaningful to my organization goes back to what you were saying, Daniel, around this needs to go beyond just kind of the transactional, the vanity metrics that we're kind of used to as marketers. Mudit, again, kind of starting with you, the 10,000 foot view, what goals and benchmarks should brands be setting for retail media? How do you think of this?
I mean, I think the ROAS is the controversial one, because I think it's the easy thing to measure. And I think there is some value to ROAS. It's an effective way of measuring if you've deployed your media correctly that week. It is not an effective way of measuring the long-term sustainability and growth of your brand. And I think that especially as we look at a world where retail media is growing and it's inflating as well, looking at bottom line growth is, I think, really important. I think the biggest problem we have in retail media is, and by the way, I think KPIs have to be different for everyone, and you shouldn't have the same KPI across different platforms. So you might have, you know, lowering cost of consumer acquisition on Amazon, but you might have a CLV goal on your DTC platform, for example. So it's fine to have different goals across channels, but I would say the biggest issue we have is just the lack of standardization in measurement across different platforms. I mean, you know, we don't have consistency in look back windows, for example, and that is really difficult because you can't compare apples to apples. And I think that the real Wild Westness of this is underreported, I think. And I think that, and I keep joking that, Daniel, you have the answers because the IAB is going to solve everything. But I do think that it's going to require the industry coming together to deal with these very real problems, because otherwise the promise of retail media will not be realized if we can't even agree to consistency in measurement standards, or what a look back window should be, or, you know, what counts as incrementality. And I think that we just need to have more alignment on that. And I think everyone stands to benefit from that. The retailers, the brands, the agencies, the ad tech, everyone stands to benefit from that. And I think it's something that I'm really hoping we see more of in the next year as these questions become sort of, you know, rise to the top table.
Daniel, is it something that you're seeing the retailers thinking about?
Well, I'm just nodding what Mudit says. You know, we'd love to solve this, and I think when I looked at my forecast, 25 billion, that's a big ticket, but that's not going to happen automatically. There isn't a risk that this is going to turn out like a CNN plus forecast. I remember an analyst forecast, and they're expecting, a chart, bottom left to upper right, massive growth in subscribers, and then a month later the service tanked. But forecasts are, of course, estimations where things could go, not where they necessarily do go. And complacency is a huge risk in this. We already see lots of complacency with many actors in the ecosystem sleepwalking now into deprecation of third-party cookies. Google has extended the deadline, etc. And it's very dangerous to kind of drink the Kool-Aid of retail media, to kind of sip this kind of organic growth which is there, but not laying the foundations for it to be sustainable. And we need to avoid that we're having this ad tech, that we're recreating this ad tech mess that we had in the industry, where a whole kind of industry is mushrooming with proprietary metrics to advance proprietary and short-term goals, and leaving the big picture behind. We need this infrastructure very quickly. I think from an industry body perspective, what's important to make that happen, and we're working on this, and some countries are further ahead than others, is retailers, everybody else, but in particular retailers, need to collaborate. And that means that in an IAB context, they need to stop seeing themselves as competitors, which is often hard. How do you get different groceries who are eyeing each other for market share, suddenly get them into an industry association and have them work together? That's not as easy. But I think we're getting there as retailers are starting to understand that this is about collaboration, and that in this sense, really, rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, absolutely. Seb, from your perspective on this topic of measurement, I'm presuming that when your CFO asks you how retail media is performing, you don't go in and tell him your ROI and your ROAS. I'm sure that they're more interested in the bigger business impact. How are you thinking about KPIs around retail media?
Yeah, so I mean, at HP, and I think Mudit kind of nodded to it. So obviously, it's very dangerous to just look at ROI, because a lot of people come to the retail media team, or so to us, and ask, right, okay, you need to plug a gap in sales for this quarter, or we need to upweight this and this kind of division for whatever reason. And so obviously looking at ROI or revenue from Amazon or the other platform is obviously a dangerous way to look at, because it is short term. It's a very short term kind of view. So the other metrics that we have available is obviously share of voice or impression share, which you can take more towards a branding perspective or branding kind of point of view. So you're looking at the longer term as opposed to just like Mudit said, like tomorrow's kind of number.
Yeah, and you've talked a lot there, even around kind of share of voice and impression share. This is data that the retailers don't make available. And Daniel, you alluded to it earlier, saying that the retailers know they need to give more data, but are they ever really going to? Mudit, again, kind of back to you. Like, what data and analytics are we missing for real kind of retail media measurement?
I think it's instead of getting into the nitty-gritty of specific metric, it's better to think about the business goals we want to try to solve. So my challenge to the retailers is help us establish incrementality and help us establish bottom line growth. How you choose to make that data available is a question for the retailers. And I'm fully mindful that if you've got a 70% margin retail DSP business, there may not be a huge amount of incentive to make that available. But equally, it's difficult to justify spend on that on something if you can't measure the incrementality and ability to drive bottom line growth. I don't think Seb's ever been in a meeting with his CEO where they've cared about ROAS or CPC. They care about bottom line and top line sales growth. And I think we need to be able to draw a direct line for what we're doing in retail media to those numbers. And I think that that's what we need to focus on, whether that is a measure of profitability, whether that is a measure of media-driven sales not achieved via organic, whether that is making incremental SOV. All of those things I think are on the table. But I think the business goal is incrementality and bottom line growth.
How are you going about getting the data that you need to be able to prove those metrics?
Is that to me or to Seb?
To Seb, sorry.
Sorry, to get those metrics, I mean, it's basically we are having to, so I'm gonna pick on Amazon here again because I know we talked about it in the last couple of questions, but for example, my team has access to obviously the advertiser, and we've got access to the Vendor Central. Vendor Central is a tool built for the sales commercial team's organization, and has specific metrics to them. Now, and this is where, you know, the balance between, okay, Amazon being a retailer and an advertiser comes into play, because for me, there's a massive missed opportunity here, because for me as a brand, I want to be able to take the information which sits in Vendor Central and fuel even my DSP or my tactics that I'm using in the advertising platform. So I can actually start mixing the metrics across. I can actually take a step back, look at business metrics that we have, internal dashboards that, you know, track the internal kind of, you know, sales growth and stuff like that. So at the moment, I don't have one place where I can take a step back and say, right, strategically, I need to be going left, straight on, or right. So at the moment, I'm still having to stitch 3 or 4 different data sets to give us somewhat of a picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, we've just had a question in from the audience, which I'm going to send your way first of all. So retailers working together could be construed as illegal, anti-competitive, and will not happen to the same extent as the non-retail media world. Do you agree? And therefore it's harder to bring the industry together?
I think it depends on, you know, which verticals you look at. I think there's a huge opportunity for retailers across different verticals working together. Initially in retail media, because we focused on endemic advertisers, i.e. those on, you know, selling stuff on a retailer's platform. Clearly, if different, let's say groceries, for instance, were working together, sharing data, is it anti-competitive? Let's park this for a moment. But I think, let's say if consumer electronics, beauty, grocery, etc., work together, in particular, you know, helping in non-endemic opportunities, I think it could be a huge win. Secondly, not sure whether it's anti-competitive on the ad front, as we're seeing, you know, even, you know, with different, let's say, grocers working together. On the advertising front, we're seeing, think of Ozone in the UK, for instance. We're seeing The Guardian, News UK, etc., working together on an ad offering. Of course, if this was, say, M&A in the publication industry, you would say, all right, does this, adhere to, pluralism and democratic principles and so forth? I'm not so sure it's going to be anti-competitive on the ad front if retailers in a single vertical work together on ad offerings. In particular, if you look at the wider competitive landscape and some of the large platforms like Amazon, like eBay, that are in the space. And I mean, we're seeing similar things happening all across the media industry, from television to publishing, etc. So I think regulators' perspectives on what constitutes anti-competitiveness have also been changing, where in the past it was consolidation was the bane of evil in a sense, whereas now it's clear that in order to facilitate and ensure long-term consumer choice, a certain degree of consolidation is actually crucial.
Muda, Sab, do you have any additional thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would just say that alignment to standards is not anti-competitive. I think if they all got together and decided to build a cartel of a sales house or something, I can see how potentially you could get there. And I think Daniel's point is completely right. You know, we have all of that. Channel 4, ITV, and Sky have all agreed that there is going to be a 30-second TV format. So I think everybody can agree that there's going to be certain formats. You know, I don't want to get stuck into it, but we don't have consistency of definition on what's the difference between sponsored brand and sponsored product. They're not even called the same thing. And that's the kind of thing that is very difficult to wrap your head around. And I think that's something that the retailers, it stands to benefit the retailers to align on things like that, which are not, in my view, anti-competitive in any way.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, for me, I don't really see how this could could be a negative, because for me it's industry standards that need to be met. I mean, we've seen it happen in kind of social, we've seen it happen in programmatic. Search, it's happened, you know, many years ago when search first kicked off. You know, it's happened in every single channel, and ours is the latest one on the block. So you know, everyone just needs to agree, you know, what ad formats are, you know, what's the standard for ad formats, what the targeting methods are, there's standards that go, what the attribution models are. You know, we talked about this a few minutes ago. You know, the reporting, you know, it's all, at the end of the day, it's economies of scale for everyone. If everyone just aligns and decides, okay, this is going to be the standard for, and if you want to go above and beyond, right, it might cost you X, Y, and Z. Fine, okay. But this is where, you know, personally, I'd see industry orgs like the AAB. So Daniel, over to you here. You know, stepping in here and, you know, facilitating the conversation with everyone.
Yeah. Maybe to just add very quickly, because I think it's such a crucial question. There are different layers of collaboration, right? I think the fundamental thing, which is not integrative at all, is what Seb and Mudit said: standards, best practices to ensure that there's a common space to trade. Secondly, it's about data sharing across different retailers. And interestingly, the European Commission is pushing forward, and now outside of the UK, a concept called data spaces, i.e. facilitating data sharing between players in a given sector to actually enhance competitiveness. The third would be then sales consolidation. And of course, here you need to avoid no price cartels and so forth. But as I said, in the media industry, even there are precedents. But I think it's going to take a while before we get there. Let's get those standards in place to ensure that the forecasts don't remain in a utopia.
Yeah, and as you say, it's happened in the non-retail media world. So hopefully we do see that level of standardization as we move forward. Speaking of the non-retail media world, I'm conscious we only have 5 minutes, and I'm sure we could talk on this topic forever. We hear a lot at the moment from our clients around kind of the deprioritization of channels, and actually wanting search and social and retail media and all of these digital channels to come together, that become kind of channel agnostic, focus on the customer experience. The channel shouldn't matter. Seb, from your perspective, how do you work today with your counterparts in search, social, these other walled gardens, the splinter net, as Daniel called it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that I look after both the search and the retail team, so that's all sits under me, which is quite lucky. But the you know, my sister team that look after obviously the display, programmatic, and the social, we work really closely together. Now, I guess there's a few ways you can look at this, and what we do is one plan, one team that enables kind of consistency, and gives kind of a homogeneous kind of side of the activation. You know, this will then enable kind of budget fluidity across the different segments of the funnel. So that's the way we kind of look at it. And then the budget allocation then depends on, you know, what the campaign objective is. And then what we do is then we prioritize either, you know, search if it's low funnel, or retail, or is it more kind of upper funnel, you know, display, DSP. And then once that channel or objective has been hit, or the threshold has been met, we move on to the next best thing. So at least that way we can max out, well, we can max out the budget as much as we can.
Mudit, what are you guys doing from an agency perspective? I'm sure you've got kind of demands from clients to become more customer centric. What's your?
I think we are having lots of conversations about relooking at MMMs and attribution models to be able to, I mean, a question that I'm having a lot of fun answering with some signs of life is, how do I tie together TV advertising with e-com? Because a CMO recently asked me, you've got to be able to tie together your largest source of investment, which is TV, and your largest source of growth, which is e-commerce. And we've looked at different ways in which we're doing it. And I think we're running out of time, but there's a lot of exciting thinking that's happening in that space, where we are looking at how we drive growth on commerce using non-retail media in cohesion with the retail media. We are absolutely seeing it as part of the way in which brands come to life using media, and not sort of a thing on the side, you know, as a you can choose it if you want sort of thing.
Yeah, I think, and we always say there's no digital in retail media as well. We've also got to consider the online, offline aspects, which we're definitely not going to get onto today. I do want to close up 30 seconds from you all. what are your 2023 predictions for retail media? Daniel, I think you touched on a little bit of them, but what do you think is going to be the overriding trend as we head into 2023?
I think we're going to see further fragmentation of the space with more launches. And we're also going to see smarter collaboration models across the value chain. I don't think we will be there with standards yet, but I think it will be increasingly clear, particularly to retailers, that it requires multiple parties to seize this opportunity.
Mudit, what are your thoughts?
I think that everybody's going to get very good at hygiene, the basics of running retail media, and I think the opportunity is going to be in bringing some creativity into it. So if you are not at the place where your brilliant basics are completely locked down, you have about 6 weeks to get that done, because I think we're going to see a real renaissance of creativity in retail media and new ways of communicating with consumers using all the data, the buying opportunities, etc.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think I saw the other day for the first time an influencer ad on retail media on the sponsored brand ad from Xbox, and it had kind of a celebrity influencer. I'm like, they're bringing it from TikTok. It's happening everywhere. It's interesting to see this kind of moving into the retail media world. Seb, your prediction for 2023?
I mean, back to what Midis was saying, like, get your brilliant basics done and dusted, because if that is not set up, you won't be able to start doing the cool stuff. So, you know, cool stuff being very simply, okay, looking at cross-channel test and learn. Okay, something that works in search, try it in retail. If it works, try it in social, and then bringing everything. Okay, it works. Good. Go and change the content on the landing page. Right. Next, what else can we do? Okay, conversion, you know, CRO, first party data, test, remarketing. Like, there's a wealth of stuff that can be done. But if your basics, your foundation is not right, you're going to have to start again in 6 months' time when everything moves, and you're going to be left behind, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, get your foundations in place. I think that's the big message from that, because there's a lot of exciting stuff to come that you're going to want to test and learn. Thank you, guys. We appreciate so much your time today. Lots of interesting insights. For the people who have asked questions, we will get answers from the panelists after this and turn them into a blog. So stay tuned for that. We'll make sure you all get it. Thank you all for your time, and I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.